Now, if one has not yet noticed the fractiousness of our times, one might assume that the person in question is living under a rock or blind, or simply, and may the gods bless him for this, not paying attention, because paying attention to this stuff is messy and it's aggravating. But yes, we do live in a time of relative disharmony relative to earlier times, which is to say, previous decades, it seems. And a lot of this is partly illusory in the sense of social media and the internet affecting us in a way such that we project certain things and we interpret certain things in a way that we otherwise would not least of which because we wouldn't have access to many of these images and this information that's presented to us in a pre-internet world. But I think there's some other important elements that people don't often speak of, and it has a lot to do with human nature and human behavior, and I've spent a lot of time recently talking about that. I'm going to be talking about other aspects now. So, cooperation is an interesting phenomenon, and only highly social mammals do it. You don't really see, for example, crocodiles cooperating, and you don't see mole rats cooperating much either. But you do see dolphins cooperate, orcas, lions, elephants, and we also see chimpanzees cooperate. In fact, up until a few decades ago, people thought chimpanzees were peaceful and they only ate roots and plants. No, in fact, they go hunting. They go hunting for monkeys, and they organize into bands of hierarchies, and together they hunt monkeys, and they're very effective this way. But one also needs to ask the question as to why these various animals cooperate. And invariably, it is to achieve something of importance, usually to acquire food. Lions hunt in prides because it is much more effective than to hunt as a lone lion. And so as a lion, you hunt in a pride and you achieve a greater goal to survive and then live further on to reproduce. The same is true of orcas. The same is true of virtually all animals that cooperate. Sometimes there are other things like grooming or what have you, but the most important factor for extreme levels of cooperation does seem to be survival. And so we can well imagine Homo erectus or some similar hominin with others of his kind hunting a certain quarry. And why? Because they all realized at the time that as a group they would be more effective than as a single lone hunter. In myriad of ways, they could take on bigger and greater prey. They probably be less vulnerable to injury, etc., etc. And it's no different for modern anatomical humans, really. The desire to cooperate was born originally of the desire to survive, because in order to get certain things done, to achieve certain tasks, you had to cooperate. If you didn't, someone would likely die, and the whole group could disintegrate. And so all forms of cooperation ultimately go back to this principle of survival and the necessity that that survival dictates to the group. But as we develop modern society, the things that necessitate cooperation become less and less survival-based and more task-oriented in a sense of tasks that lie outside of the purview of survival, which is to say, you go to a job and you cooperate with other people because there's some task assigned to you and others, and you work collectively because you're getting paid. And getting paid in a modern context allows you to survive, which is why typically in work environments you usually see the most cooperation, because the cooperation is necessitated. And that's the key point here, gentlemen. Cooperation is necessitated. In broader modern Western civilization, though, you don't see nearly as much cooperation. I talked about this before. Neighbors are not as neighborly as they used to be. People treat each other like strangers, etc., etc. A lot of this is just down to the size and populations of various countries. In former times, in hunter-gatherer times, most societies, if you even wanted to call them that, were communal. And so everyone had to pitch in. Everyone had to cooperate. But with so many of the basic necessities taken care of, and the ones not being taken care of being covered by your employment, which is to say you go to work, make money so you can survive. And in that context, yes, you do cooperate because it's necessary and required of you. It leaves a whole lot of wriggling room in areas of life that have nothing to do with survival, whether in the most direct sense of our ancestors or in the indirect sense of going to work, where you simply don't need to cooperate. And the other element of cooperation is the tribal element. Human beings beings are fairly tribal. We all know this. And cooperation helps to keep people together in order to build and preserve bonds between them. But in the hyper-modern context of 2021, one could argue that a lot of the cooperation that was required in former times and certainly required in an ancestral environment is not needed anymore. But we still have all of the tribalism. And usually, tribalism is fused together with the need to cooperate within a certain in-group. And because there's so many different groups that have emerged in the hyper-modern context of the current year, many, many different types of tribalisms have emerged, and as a consequence, it's really hard to get along. And the most important factor here is we don't really need to survive in the traditional sense. And so when we observe that we've seen less and less cooperation and less getting along, of course, a lot of that has to do with things being accelerated by the internet and the media blowing them up, but it also has a lot to do with the fact that we have moved so far away from our origins and how we get along with each other that it has become a real challenge to replicate that sort of harmony in a large-scale society. And by and large, the way these societies do it is through some sort of market means. You have large markets, capitalist markets, and people make their money and they buy goods, and everyone in theory is happy. But on the macro scale, even though I certainly would argue that modern market societies is the best way of running things compared to communal societies of the days of yore, they don't produce the same level of cooperation because everyone is so far removed from each other. So we're in a real pickle because necessity being the mother of invention and necessity being the mother of cooperation, the necessity simply doesn't exist anymore unless maybe you're in a work setting, but that's very different and very limited. And so in every context other than that perhaps, and even sometimes within the work setting, cooperation is not a given in the same way it would have been a few hundred years ago. So this is the pickle we're in. We have incredibly low stakes, and when the stakes are low, not much happens. And the other problem is, it's not as if tribalism has been minimized as a consequence of this. And so we have all the tribalism and all these other issues, but without the need to survive such that we are forced to cooperate collectively. Because at the end of the day, you look at a country like the United States, which has roughly 330 million people, and you have to ask the question, how can all of these people cooperate? We could also say, well, they don't need to. But because everyone is interconnected via the internet, in some sense, ideally, they should. And so I would propose that as much as so much of this is derived from modern social media and the internet driving us to lunacy, a lot of this is simply a derivative of developments, broad developments in modern societies. Gigantic social arrangements wherein people do sort of get along, but there's no overarching force that unites them, which is to say survival, to force them to get along. And so they become petty in their tribalism. This is at least in part how you get the political divisions of our time. People sniping at other people because they don't ostensibly belong to the same tribe. And of course there's some conflict over resources, but the resources are much more abstract. In a former time, setting aside the huge population differences, these sorts of conflicts would not occur. There would be other conflicts, but not the sort of highly politicized, highly ideological conflict we bear witness to now. And so this could very well have been an inevitability with or without the internet. Going forward, it might be useful to bear this in mind as a tool of analysis if people, broadly speaking, want to navigate the current version of reality we inhabit, because it always helps to go back to our evolutionary roots. I'm not saying we can change it, but if we do want to change these things, it's best to examine the underlying causes, and these causes are almost invariably found in our evolutionary background and our development as modern human apes. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you've not yet done so. Hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos, share the video. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later, and may the gods watch over you. You take care, and bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.